My fiancé insisted on a postnup to safeguard her fortune. I signed it without a second thought. 5 years later, she lost everything while I built an empire. Now she's desperate to rewrite history. You know, sometimes life has a funny way of delivering its own brand of justice. Imagine creating an ironclad agreement, a fortress built to protect your future, only for that very fortress to become the ultimate weapon in your own downfall. That's exactly what happened with my ex-wife, and trust me, watching it unfold was a masterclass in poetic justice. I met Rachel when we were both 26. She was a high-flying pharmaceutical sales rep, pulling in around $95,000 a year. Me? I was just starting out, running a small logistics consulting firm. It was stable, but nothing fancy, maybe $60K after expenses, with most of it reinvested right back into the company. We clicked instantly at a networking event, bonding over shared complaints about corporate absurdity. Dating was easy, natural. Rachel was fiercely ambitious, and I admired that. She had this meticulously detailed 5-year plan, regional manager, then VP of sales. She talked about it constantly, and honestly, I found her drive respectable. We traveled, shared a dark sense of humor, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. About 18 months in, I proposed. Nothing grand, just a quiet weekend upstate. She said yes, tears in her eyes, and within 10 minutes, the whole world knew thanks to social media. But then came the conversation. The one that, in hindsight, screamed red flag. We were 6 months out from the wedding, knee-deep in planning, when Rachel dropped a bombshell, a postnuptial agreement. Not a prenup, a postnup. She wanted us to get married first, and then sign a document that would keep all our finances completely separate. I was at my desk, working on a proposal, when she walked in with her laptop, a serious, almost clinical expression on her face. She pulled up a document she'd already drafted, bullet points and everything. This wasn't a casual chat. She'd put serious work into this. The terms were brutally simple. Her money, 100% hers. My money, 100% mine. No commingling of assets ever. Separate bank accounts for everything except shared household expenses, which we'd split exactly 50/50. If we ever divorced, neither of us could claim a single cent from the other's income or assets accumulated during the marriage. Clean. Separate. Ironclad. She explained it like a business proposal, professional, rehearsed, detached. She'd worked too hard, she said, to risk losing her financial independence. She'd seen too many women get screwed over in divorces, their husbands taking half of everything they'd earned. She wanted protection. She wanted security. She wanted what was hers to stay hers, no matter what happened to us. Here's where I think I completely blindsided her. I just said, okay. No argument. No negotiation. No wounded pride. Not even a question about whether she trusted me. I told her it sounded perfectly fair and that I'd have my lawyer review it. She looked almost disappointed, like she'd prepared this elaborate speech about why it was necessary, why it didn't mean she didn't love me, but I'd cut her off before she could even start. The truth? I didn't care about the postnup. Not one bit. I'd built my business from absolute scratch, saving every penny from working 2 jobs in college, sometimes 3. Every client, every success, I'd earned through sheer grit. If Rachel wanted to keep her money separate, that was absolutely fine by me. My plans for my company didn't depend on her salary. My lawyer confirmed it, ironclad. Everything was separate. Every dollar. Every asset. If we divorced, we each walked away with exactly what we'd personally earned. No alimony. No splitting assets. No arguments. Just a clean break. I signed it 3 months after our wedding, and Rachel filed it with her lawyer that very same day. She seemed genuinely relieved, like she'd just dodged a massive bullet. The first year of marriage was fine. We found our rhythm. Rachel was thriving, climbing the corporate ladder. She got promoted to senior sales rep, her territory spanning 3 states, her income jumping to $110,000. She'd remind me of that more than once. Soon, she was talking nonstop about designer bags, luxury trips to Europe, upgrading our apartment. Meanwhile, I was still grinding away at my business, taking on clients nobody else wanted, tight margins, incredibly tedious, detail-oriented work. I specialized in logistics optimization for mid-sized distributors, basically untangling supply chains, finding inefficiencies, and saving them money. It wasn't glamorous. Most of my clients were warehouse owners, not hospital executives closing six-figure deals like Rachel. Then the comments started. Nothing overtly cruel, just subtle, stinging digs. When we went out with her work friends, she'd introduce me as someone who works in logistics with this tone that made it sound like I drove a forklift. A couple of times, she even told people I was between things, which was a flat-out lie. I mostly ignored it. I was too busy actually working to care about her constant need for status validation. My business was growing, slowly, steadily, sustainably. I was adding clients, refining systems, building a solid reputation. I wasn't pulling in Rachel's numbers yet, but I was investing everything back into the company strategically. I'd even hired my first employee, a data analyst named Kevin, who could spot a supply chain inefficiency faster than I could blink. Year 2. Things subtly shifted. Rachel got another promotion, regional manager. Her salary shot up to $135,000, plus quarterly bonuses that added another $15,000. She bought herself a luxury sedan with her bonus money. She was constantly talking about a trendier neighborhood, better amenities. I was still driving my paid-off college sedan, still living in the same apartment. Her comments became more frequent, more pointed. She'd joke, openly, about being the breadwinner, sometimes in front of our friends. She'd suggest I consider a real job with benefits instead of playing entrepreneur. When her friends asked what I did, she'd say I was figuring things out, her polite corporate way of calling me unemployed. But here's the thing, my business was doing well. Really well. That year, I landed 3 major clients, including a regional distributor who needed a complete overhaul across multiple states. That one contract alone was worth $180,000 over 2 years. I wasn't making Rachel's salary, but I was profitable, growing, and building something that could actually scale. Rachel didn't see it. To her, success meant a corporate title and a 6-figure salary. My business? Just a side hustle that was taking too long. She'd constantly ask when I was going to get serious about my career. I'd remind her I owned a business, with multiple clients depending on me. She'd wave it off, like it didn't count. The postnup hung over everything, an unspoken agreement that she was the successful one, and I was just a work in progress. She'd reference it, always with a sharp edge, saying, well, it's my money, so I can spend it how I want. Implying I should be grateful she wasn't asking me to contribute to her luxury upgrades. I never took the bait. I just kept working, kept grinding, kept building. I hired 2 more employees. We moved from my home office to a proper space with a real conference room. My revenue that year hit $240,000. After expenses and salaries, I was personally clearing about $85,000. Not Rachel's level, but respectable for a 3-year-old business. Year 3. Everything changed. I landed a national distributor contract, optimizing their entire logistics network across 12 states. It was the biggest deal I'd ever pursued, and frankly, I wasn't sure I could deliver. The margin for error was 0. I spent 3 grueling months pitching, creating detailed proposals, running simulations. Rachel barely even noticed. Her only response? Does this mean you'll finally have enough money to contribute more to our household expenses? We were still splitting everything 50-50, per her postnup. I calmly reminded her that the agreement she insisted on specified equal splitting. She went quiet. The next 18 months were probably the most intense period of my life. I was managing the national project while still servicing all my existing clients. I hired 6 more people, moved into a proper office suite. I basically lived at work. Rachel and I barely saw each other. She was traveling constantly, so was I. When we were home, we were too exhausted for anything but takeout and TV. My revenue that year? $680,000. Crazy growth. After all expenses, salaries, and reinvestment, I was personally clearing about $145,000. For the first time since we met, I was making more than Rachel. She didn't say anything directly, but I saw it. She stopped joking about being the breadwinner. She stopped suggesting I get a real job. She just got noticeably quieter about money. The topic had become uncomfortable for her. But something else was happening with her career, something she couldn't control. Her pharmaceutical company merged with a larger competitor. Layoffs. Eliminations. Rachel started coming home visibly stressed, complaining bitterly about office politics. She'd spent years climbing, and now the ladder was being dismantled beneath her feet. I tried to be supportive, to listen, but my bandwidth was almost non-existent. I was scaling my business aggressively, dealing with my own enormous challenges. I'd listen, offer suggestions, but I couldn't drop everything to counsel her through corporate drama every night. Year 4. Rachel's career imploded. The merger finalized. Half of all regional manager positions were eliminated. Rachel survived the first brutal round of cuts, but her territory was slashed dramatically, from 3 states to 1. Her salary dropped significantly to $105,000, with reduced bonuses. She was absolutely devastated. Her entire identity was wrapped in corporate success, and now it was crumbling. Meanwhile, my business was exploding. The national distributor, so impressed, referred us to 2 other major companies. I hired 3 more people, opened a satellite office. Our revenue hit $1.2 million. I was personally clearing about $280,000. Rachel barely acknowledged my success. She was too consumed by her own misery. She'd come home and complain for hours about how unfair everything was, how she'd done everything right, how the merger had screwed her over. I'd sit there and listen, but it was getting old. For years, she'd treated my business like a cute hobby. Now that her prestigious career was tanking, she expected endless sympathy. The tension at home grew weekly. Money became a huge, unspoken issue. Rachel was still making decent money, but she was used to a lifestyle her reduced salary couldn't support. She started making pointed comments about combining our finances, saying it didn't make logical sense to keep everything separate. I calmly reminded her about the postnup. Her postnup. The one she insisted on, drafted, and filed. The one that explicitly kept all our money and assets completely separate. She got instantly defensive. Things are different now, she argued. I asked her, very directly, what exactly was different. She couldn't give me a straight answer. We both knew what was different. She was making significantly less, and I was making significantly more. Suddenly, the agreement that had protected her money when she was the high earner didn't seem quite so appealing or fair. I didn't budge. We kept separate finances. She kept paying her half of the expenses. I kept paying mine. But the resentment was a tangible thing, growing between us. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about how I could afford to be generous now, or how she'd supported me when I was building my business. That last part was particularly rich, considering she'd spent years suggesting I quit my silly hobby and get a real job. Year 5. Everything finally exploded. Rachel got laid off. Another brutal round of restructuring, and this time, her name was on the list. 3 months of severance, some worthless stock options, and a generic corporate, "Thank you for your service" email. She was utterly devastated, existentially shaken. Her entire identity for years had been tied to her career, her title, her position. Now it was just gone. She defined success purely by her corporate title and 6-figure salary. And suddenly, she had neither. I genuinely tried to be sympathetic. I really did. I told her she'd find something else, that her experience was valuable, that this was just a setback. But honestly, a part of me remembered every dismissive comment, every condescending joke. All the subtle put-downs about my less legitimate career choices. Meanwhile, my business was having its absolute best year ever. We landed 2 massive contracts with national retailers. My revenue hit $2.4 million. I hired 8 more people. We moved into a significantly bigger office. I was personally clearing about $520,000. The disparity between us was impossible to ignore. Rachel was unemployed, burning through her severance. I was pulling in more money than both of us had ever made combined. And we had a legal agreement she had created, keeping everything completely separate. She started job hunting aggressively, but the market was brutal for someone at her level and salary expectations. Her skills were highly specific, and there weren't many openings. She'd get interviews, but no offers. Her severance was running out fast, and I saw the real panic in her eyes. That's when she first suggested we renegotiate the postnup. We were at the dinner table, Chinese takeout between us. She brought it up as casually as possible. The agreement didn't make sense anymore, she said. Our situations had changed dramatically. We should pool our resources, work as a team. Marriage was about partnership. I asked her very directly if she'd felt that exact same way 5 years ago when she'd insisted on creating this agreement. She said that was different. I pressed her, how was it different? She immediately got angry, defensive. The argument that followed was the most brutally honest conversation of our marriage. She finally admitted it, something I'd suspected all along. She'd created the postnup because she absolutely assumed she'd always be the higher earner. She'd wanted to protect her money because she genuinely didn't think my little consulting business would amount to much. She saw me as a nice enough guy with a struggling startup that would probably never take off. She wanted to make sure I couldn't take her hard-earned money if things didn't work out. Now, the entire situation was reversed. And she desperately wanted me to ignore the agreement she'd crafted. She wanted immediate access to my money now that she had none. She wanted me to rescue her, to save her from the consequences of her job loss. I told her no. Not out of spite. Not out of revenge. Simply because the agreement was the agreement. She'd insisted on it. I'd signed it willingly. It was legally binding. If I'd wanted access to her money back when she was making $135,000, she would have pointed to that exact same agreement and told me that's not how it works. She completely lost it. Screamed that I was cruel, heartlessly abandoning her, that marriage meant unconditional support. I calmly pointed out that support goes both ways. She hadn't been particularly supportive when I was building my business. She denied it, claimed she'd always been supportive, conveniently forgetting all the dismissive comments. The fight lasted hours, growing more heated, until she stormed off, slamming the bedroom door so hard the wall shook. I slept on the couch that night. The next few weeks were incredibly tense. She was applying for jobs constantly, getting nowhere. Her severance ran out. She started draining her personal savings to pay her half of the household expenses. I saw the genuine panic in her eyes as her bank account dwindled. 2 weeks later, she brought up the postnup again. Different approach this time. Emotional manipulation, guilt. She talked about our shared history, how we were a unified team. She cried real tears, said she was terrified. She desperately needed my help. I felt bad, truly. I'm not heartless. But I also vividly remembered every dismissive comment, every joke about my hobby, every time she'd prioritized her career over our relationship. And I remembered that postnup. The one she'd personally drafted. The one that said, explicitly, we keep absolutely everything separate, no matter what happened. I offered her an alternative, a reasonable solution. I'd lend her money. A personal loan, with a market interest rate, a notarized agreement. She could borrow what she needed to stay afloat, and pay me back in installments once she was working again. She was immediately offended. I'm your wife, not a random business client, she cried. Married couples don't charge each other interest. I calmly replied, married couples also don't try to burn legally binding agreements when they become inconvenient. She said I'd changed, that I was cold and calculating. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I'd just stopped being a pushover. Things deteriorated rapidly. Rachel's savings were almost gone. She was weeks behind on her bills. Her car payment went unpaid. She was facing the harsh reality that her comfortable lifestyle wasn't sustainable on limited unemployment. Then I noticed files moved around in our shared office. One afternoon, I came home early from a client meeting and found her standing in my home office, holding a lighter. In her other hand, trembling, was the original, signed postnuptial agreement, which I kept in a locked filing cabinet. Her thumb was on the spark wheel, ready to ignite it. I asked her, very calmly, what she thought she was doing. She startled, nearly dropping the lighter. "If it doesn't physically exist," she whispered, desperation in her voice, "we can't enforce it. We'd have to split everything 50-50, like a normal married couple. I'd have access to half your business." I informed her, very matter-of-factly, that my lawyer had a copy. Her lawyer had a copy. The court had an official copy because she had filed it there years ago. Burning this one piece of paper wouldn't make the agreement disappear. Slowly, she put the lighter down. Then she started crying uncontrollably. She didn't know what else to do, she wailed. She was broke, unemployed, terrified. I was her husband. I should help her. I genuinely did want to help her, just not the way she wanted to be helped. I wanted her to accept the consequences of the agreement she'd created. I wanted her to find a job, any job, and start rebuilding her life instead of expecting me to bail her out. I wanted her to demonstrate the fierce self-sufficiency she'd been so proud of when she was the high earner. But she wasn't interested in self-sufficiency anymore. She wanted a complete rescue. She wanted me to pretend the postnup didn't exist and just hand over money. And when I refused, she tried to literally burn the evidence of the agreement she herself had crafted. I took the postnup from her trembling hands, put it back in the filing cabinet, and locked it. I took the key. She watched silently, then left my office and locked herself in the bedroom for the rest of the day. That night, after she'd finally fallen asleep, I called my lawyer at home. I explained everything. He was grave. An attempt to destroy a legal agreement showed clear intent to commit fraud, he said. He suggested, very directly, that I consider whether this marriage was worth continuing. I'd been thinking the exact same thing. Rachel and I had been growing apart for years, and this financial situation had just made it impossible to ignore. Our entire relationship was built on the assumption that she'd always be the successful corporate one, and I'd always be playing catch-up. When reality flipped that assumption on its head, she simply couldn't handle it. But I still didn't want a divorce yet. Not because I loved her, honestly, that had faded long ago, but because divorce was messy, expensive, time-consuming. I had a rapidly growing business, clients depending on me. I didn't want to spend a year in court. So I made her what I thought was a fair final offer. I'd help her financially, but only if she agreed to sign an addendum to the postnup. The addendum would state, in writing, that any money I gave her was a loan, not a gift, and had to be repaid within 5 years with interest. If she couldn't repay it, I could deduct the full amount from any future divorce settlement. She refused immediately. Insulting. Degrading. Married couples don't charge each other interest, she spat. I shot back. Married couples also don't try to burn legal agreements when they become inconvenient. We reached a complete stalemate. She had no money. I had plenty. Neither of us would budge. She eventually started applying for jobs outside her field, retail management, office admin. Anything for income. Her pride was finally catching up with reality. She found a job at a medical supply company inside sales, making $55,000 annually. Less than half her peak salary. She took it. She had no other choice. She started working, slowly rebuilding, gradually paying her bills again. But the marriage was effectively over. We lived like distant roommates, separate schedules, separate lives. The resentment was a physical weight in the air. She resented me for not saving her. I resented her for expecting me to. 6 months after she started the new job, my lawyer messaged me. Rachel's lawyer had inquired about modifying the postnup. She was still trying to find a way around her own agreement. My lawyer sent a response. He attached a copy of the original postnup, highlighted all the sections about keeping finances separate, and added a note that simply said, "Per your client's instructions from 5 years ago, all assets remain separate. Good luck with your inquiry." Rachel's lawyer never responded. Rachel never brought it up, but I knew she'd gotten the message. The agreement was ironclad. My business kept growing. We landed contracts with 2 more major retailers, expanded into new markets. Our revenue hit $3.8 million. I was clearing over $700,000 personally. I bought a house. Nothing crazy, just a nice place in a good neighborhood. I told Rachel she could keep the apartment. I paid my half of the rent until the lease ended. Then I moved out. She didn't fight it. We both knew the marriage was over. 3 months later, I filed for divorce. No drama. No fights. Just paperwork. The postnup made everything simple. We each kept what we'd earned. No alimony. No asset splitting. A clean break. Rachel tried to challenge it one last time, her lawyer claiming the postnup was signed under duress. My lawyer responded with emails, text messages, documented evidence showing Rachel had drafted the agreement, insisted on it, and filed it herself. The judge dismissed her motion without hesitation. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Rachel got nothing except what she'd earned herself, which, at that point, was about $47,000 in savings, most of it depleted during unemployment. I got everything I'd built. The postnup she had created to protect her success from my perceived failure ended up protecting my success from her actual failure. My lawyer billed me $8,500. Worth every single penny. 2 weeks after the divorce, Rachel's lawyer made one last desperate attempt. They filed a motion claiming the postnup should be voided because Rachel had signed it under emotional duress, seeing as we were already married. My lawyer responded with the drafts Rachel had created, the emails where she'd explained her reasoning, the text messages where she'd told friends she was protecting her assets from her entrepreneur husband. The judge threw it out in less than 5 minutes. I later heard through a mutual friend that Rachel had to borrow money from her parents to pay her lawyer. The same parents who'd always thought she was too good for me. Apparently, they weren't thrilled about funding a legal battle to get money from the guy they'd spent years looking down on. 3 months after the divorce, I was at a restaurant downtown for a client dinner when I saw Rachel. She was there with some guy, looked like a first or second date. She saw me too. For a second, I thought she might come over, but she just turned back to her date, pretending she hadn't noticed. I heard through the grapevine she eventually found a better job, $78,000 at a medical device company, better than $55,000, but nowhere near her peak. She moved to a smaller apartment, started driving for a rideshare service on weekends for extra cash. The same woman who used to buy designer bags with her bonuses was now shuttling people to the airport for gas money. Meanwhile, my company kept scaling. We landed a contract with a Fortune 500 retailer, logistics optimization across 200 distribution centers. That deal alone was worth $2.3 million over 2 years. I hired 12 more people, including a COO, so I could focus on strategy. About a year after the divorce, Rachel sent me an email. Subject line, "Can we talk?" The message was long. She apologized. Said she'd been scared and desperate. Never meant to hurt me. Then she got to the real point. She was struggling financially, still in debt from the divorce, and wanted to know if I'd be willing to help her out. Not as her ex-husband, but as someone who'd once cared about her. Maybe a personal loan, reasonable terms. She promised she'd pay it back. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. I didn't respond. She sent 2 follow-up emails over the next month. I deleted those too. On the 3rd one, I finally replied. My message was short, simple, and final. The postnup you created says we keep everything separate. That still applies. Good luck with everything. That was 2 years ago. Haven't heard from her since. So, tell me, have you ever faced a situation where an agreement, meant to protect one person, ended up serving a completely different purpose? Or perhaps, you've experienced your own moment of poetic justice? I'm really curious to hear what you make of all this in the comments below.